That is here with my friend Arpit Shivastava. We are doing I think it's lesson 11 on Portal Zero to Hero. Arpit is demonstrating ALM. Last week's lesson was really good. It really went from zero to hero pretty quick. And then this week, Arpit is just taking the time to show us best practices. So I really appreciate you doing this for us, Arpit, taking your time and your knowledge and sharing with the community. So without any further ado, I will mute myself, Arpit, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Victor. Thanks for organizing this Power Apps Portal Zero to Hero session. It's really helpful for all the all the folks that they are planning to become their career in the portals. They want to learn from the scratch. So we already had some interesting sessions on the liquid template CSS. And we have some interesting stuff that Microsoft recently introduced related to the Power Apps Portal ALM. So we have been doing a lot of interesting things related to the portal deployments and the developments. We had a couple of tools that we had used in the past, but recently Microsoft has announced the PowerApps CLI as part of the PowerApps portal. So so just wanted to give a quick recap of my last session. So in our last session that we also get from the Vector YouTube channel as well. So in our last session, we had a fundamental demonstration of all the ALM capabilities. What is the ALM? What is the PowerApps portal ALM looks like? And we also demonstrated all the kinds of the extension that the Microsoft has provided, along with the extension that I have created to portal deployment. So in this session, in my last session, I have almost covered all the things related to the PowerApps portal deployment. But in this deployment, I'm going to cover all the development and the deployment best practices. I think that can make your ALM process more smooth than ever. So let me share my screen quickly so that we can quickly have a look. All right. So, as I told that today we're going to discuss about the PowerApps portal application lifecycle management. So, as part of lifecycle management, one of the most crucial the phase is the development phase after the planning phase and the deployment phase. So, development and deployment is one of the most crucial phase of the portal deployment. It has always been the complex process till now, but as soon as the Microsoft introduced this PowerApps CLI, it becomes so easy to us to deploy the portals, to start doing development in the portals using Visual Studio. So before starting this session, I just wanted to give a brief introduction myself. My name is Arpit Srivastava, and I'm recently been announced as the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the Business Application category. I'm the Microsoft Certified Trainer as well, and I'm currently working in Capgemini as a Power Platform Architect. I've also been nominated as the India Dynamics 365 User Group Lead, and I've been awarded with the Power Community Ambassador as well. So if you want to follow me on or connect with me through various social media channels, you can connect me through my blogs, through my YouTube channels, where I often upload a lot of recordings and interesting stuff related to the Power platforms. So you can find all the interesting stuff on my social media channels. So as long as the today's agenda is concerned, I think I have mistakenly opened the wrong PPT. Okay, so here's my latest PPT. Okay, so as long as the today's agenda is concerned, we're gonna discuss about the portal's development best practices. Okay, so we know that a lot of folks are working on the Power Apps portal. But we often miss a lot of best practices, how effectively we can use the the portal components. We only understand that which component is used for what purpose, but we often miss it's actually the beauty behind of its technical specialities, right? So in this session we're going to discuss about what are the development best practices we have to follow while doing the portal development, and then we're going to discuss about the deployment best practices as well. I'm gonna discuss about the tool that I have, the build in the in more deep dive way, because in my last session I've just given the overview of it, that how we're going to use that. But in this session, I'm going to demonstrate the step-by-step process to use that tool, use this tool. Okay, and obviously, if you have any questions, then yeah, you can feel free to ask me this question at the end of the session. All right, so let's get started with the best practices of the portal. So first of all, if I talk about the development best practices, I have categorized all the best practices of the portals in multiple categories. So in general, if I talk about the portal best practices, the first is like, you need to choose your portal type correctly. So I've seen, a lot of scenarios where people mistakenly chose the wrong portals, and they end up mess up everything, on their Dynamics 365 instances. Because this is one of the limitation, you can say that once you install in a particular portal, you cannot change that portal type. So for example, if you have installed the starter portal, you cannot change it to the partner portal, the community portal. So make sure you have the proper requirement with your client, and you have the proper analysis that what you're going to do with the portals. So based on that, you have to choose your portal type correctly. So if you're not sure that which portal is fitting your requirement, just go for the starter portal. Or if you want to customize the whole portal from the scratch, then definitely you go with the starter portal. Or if you want to use some existing feature that the Microsoft provided, for example, in the partner portal, customer portal, or the community portal, then definitely you should go with the existing templates that the Microsoft has provided. So this is one of the most important thing, that you have to choose your portal type precisely. Identify your portal user effectively, because the portal licensing and the pricing is basically depend on the how the user is logging on the portal. So if the anonymous user is logging on the portal licensing basically depends on the per page view. And if the authenticated user is logging onto the portal, then the pricing and the licensing cost based on the per login basis. So you need to, and the Dynamic 365 users are already covered in the Dynamic 365 license in order to use the portal. So you need to effectively, choose the user types and the group of user who are going to use the portal, so that you can, simply avoid paying extra in order to use the portals. The third point is, please avoid using multiple portals in the same environment. But I have used this terminology, that please avoid, because most of the time I have seen that people have used multiple portals without actually need in that particular organization. So sometimes, for example, if you are using the community portal, and the community portal is doing all the necessary things to you, and it's actually fitting all your requirement, but just because of one or two requirement, you install the another portal in your instance. So it is actually increasing the complexity actually in your Dynamic 365 instance, in terms of the development, in terms of the maintenance, and in terms of the deployment. So just make sure that unless it is really required that you need to have the multiple portals in your instance, then use it. Otherwise, just try to use a single portal in your instance, and always try to fit all your business needs using that particular portal. Make sure you have the proper rights before provisioning the portal, because sometimes when you start provisioning the portal, you get a lot of errors, right? So I've already posted the blog on this, that how many types of errors you face when you install the portals. Because when you install the portal, or when you provision the portal, it actually creates a web app in the background in the Azure Active Directory. So sometimes what happen is, you have the proper rights in your Dynamics 365 instance, you have the proper rights in your Office 365 instance, you have the proper rights in your Power Platform instance, but you don't have the proper rights in Azure AD instance. But you still think that I have all the rights, but why still I'm not able to upload the portal, I'm install the portals in my instance. So the reason is that it actually create or install a particular app in the Azure Active Directory. So you need to make sure that you have the global administrator rights in your Azure Active Directory as well. So make sure that you have the proper rights. You have to properly plan that what rights you need to have in order to provision the portal. Don't use portal local authentication, as we already know that local authentication has been deprecated, but still there is an option to log in on the portal using local authentication. So that is a good fit if you just want to explore the portal functionality. You just want to check that how portal works, how the portal authentication works. Then it is fine. But for the actual use, for the production purpose, you should not use the portal local authentication. You should always use the Azure AD B2C authentication for all your customers. Okay. Avoid saving documents attachments in CRM if possible, and use Azure Blob Store in the SharePoint instance, because if you are storing all the documents related to the portals, then it may create the performance issues and increase your database size as well. So try to use, if possible, then store your all the files related to the portal in the Azure Blob storage and the SharePoint. And the last one that comes in the general category is that you should opt for early updates in the development of the testing portals, because when you provision the portal, if you go to the admin center, there is an option to automatically upgrade the new features in your portals when Microsoft releases that. So always make sure that when you install the portal, just include that option or tick mark that option only for the development and testing instances. Don't include that option for the production instances. All right. So these are the some best practices that comes under the general category. Now, if I talk about the individual components of the portal, so if I talk about the web pages, the naming convention must be meaningful. All right. So this is not only applicable for the web pages, but whatever components you are creating in the portals, like web page, entity forms, entity list, content snippet, web templates. So whatever components you are creating, just use the proper naming convention. Okay. Manage localized contents effectively, because these are all the best practices actually I have created based on my experience, because I have personally faced a lot of issue and spent a lot of time troubleshooting that, because once you create a web page, it actually creates a localized content as well. So what happens sometimes is you actually write your script in a one localized content, but forget to copy that same script or CSS on another localized content, and you still and you spend a lot of time to figure it out, that what is the issue, why my changes is not being reflected on the portal. Another example is that, for example, you have associated the entity form or entity list with the web page, but you forgot to associate the same with the localized content. So in that case also, the entity form and the entity list will not appear on the portal. Usually there are some background plugins are being written that automatically map the changes that you are doing on the web page on the localized content. But sometimes it doesn't happen when you are making changes on the web page. It doesn't reflect on the localized content. So make sure whatever changes you are doing on the web page, just make sure you are doing it on the localized content as well. The third point, don't use void space in the partial URL, because sometimes it actually create the server error. So always use the proper naming convention in the partial URL. For example, the hyphens, the underscores like that, but don't use any void spaces in the partial URL. Partial URL web page must be meaningful. So partial URL is basically the name of your web page that appears in the URL. So for example, if you are creating a web page for the create case, just use a proper naming convention like create hyphen case, submit hyphen inquiry. So the user who is using the portal can easily understand what is the purpose of this web page. All right. The next thing is that always use web page access control, because whatever the information or the data you are exposing on the web page should be could be the confidential as well. So the make sure that the web page that you are exposing on the portal should have a proper web page access security is associated with that. Otherwise, the user who is not even logged in on the portal can easily access the the data on the web page that is being exposed on the portal. So always make sure that you are using the web page access control rules. Let's talk about some of the best practices on the entity forms. So the duplicate field should be avoided on the entity form. So for example, if you want to expose the entity forms, or nowadays we are calling it as a basic forms. So on the basic form of the entity form, if you are exposing on the portal, you need to create a CRM form in the Dynamics 365 instance, right? So it is not allowed that because in the dynamic CRM you can create a same field multiple times on the forms, right? But if you are trying to use the same form on the portal, you will not be able to do that. You will get the server error. Okay, so make sure that you are not using the same field twice on the form if you are using that on the portal. Always create a new CRM form for portal entity form. Don't use existing CRM form, because I personally observed, a lot of issues. So for example, if I want to expose a CRM form on the portal, so the one option is, I can directly go to the CRM, Dynamics 365 CRM entity, and I can use the information form. So there is a out of box information form is there, right? So I can directly use the information form in order to expose on the portal, but the information form is already being used in the CRM as well. So there are two things. The same form, if the same form is going to be used on the CRM and the portal, then if anything is being changed by the CRM developer in the dynamic CRM end, it will automatically reflect on the portal that you don't want to use that, right? Sometimes you want that the different UI, the different features on the form should be there for the portals and the CRM users. So in that case, it's always preferable to keep your portal form and the CRM form different. If you render a lookup control as a drop down list on the form, the related record does not work. So we have a features called the in the entity form metadata that we can convert the lookup into drop down, because sometimes your client doesn't doesn't want to use the lookup control because it requires a lot of clicks and all in order to select a particular value. So as long as if the number of values are less in the lookup control, then it is fine, then you can convert it to drop down. But make sure if the number of records is very high, just I would recommend don't convert it to the drop down, because it will create the form loading issue and the performing issue on the portal. All right. And the second thing that if you are using any lookup filtering, for example, if you are filtering the states based on the country, and if you are converting that into the drop down, then you will not be able to use the out of box or the filtering if you are using the drop down instead of lookup. It is recommended to create a workflow instead of adding an activate or deactivated button for out of box entity having defined. So we have the options. We have the options on the entity form that we can simply trigger the workflows, the real-time workflow, the background processes on the entity form directly. So instead of writing your custom logic to activate or deactivate a particular buttons or performing action in the background, just use the out of box features like workflow is out of box features on the entity form. Use captcha on the entity form when it is being exposed to the anonymous user. So sometimes we have the requirement, we get the requirement from the client that you want to expose a particular form on the portal for the anonymous user. You don't want that user need to fill that information to log in onto the portal, right? So in that case, just to avoid the performance issue, you can simply use the captcha on the entity form when it is exposed to the anonymous user. And always use the entity form metadata for metadata changes. So sometimes what happen is if you want to change the label of that, of a particular field, or if you want to change the label of a tab or the section, sometimes we don't know the capabilities of the entity form metadata, and we write a lot of scripts, in the custom JavaScript section in order to do that. So just make sure that if you want to do any sort of changes related to the metadata, for example, label changes, feed requirement label, or some PCF control related changes, then always make sure that you are using the entity form metadata. Let's talk about the entity list. The same goes with the entity list, that entity list must be associated with all the localized content. So you need to make sure that, because sometimes it doesn't associate automatically. Avoid using CRM existing views to create entity list. So this is also applicable in the entity list. Same like we should use the different forms in the CRM and the portal, and the same goes with the entity list. So nowadays we are calling it as a basic list. Sorry, table list. And in the table list, we always I always recommend to use the different views, because if anyone is making any changes in the CRM views, it will automatically reflect it on the portal. So we don't want to do that, because sometimes the columns, the search criteria that we want to use on the portal, we don't want to use in the CRM, and vice versa. So always create a different views. Multi-select options is not supported, so there are few set of fields that is still not supported on the portal. So just make sure that you are not adding that particular field in your portal entity list. Enable entity permission if you are using entity list for OData feeds, because sometimes when you require to retrieve the data using OData, so if you're not enabling the entity permission, anyone who is having the URL or the developer who is having, access of the portal URL, they can simply hit the URL in the browser and get the portal data. So always make sure if you are enabling any enabling the OData feeds on a particular table, then make sure that you are enabling the entity permission so that you can avoid exposing your confidential data or Dynamics 365 data to the unwanted hands. Okay. If you have secured an entity list by selecting enable entity permissions, then you want to use the entity list show record label action. So what happens sometimes is there are a lot of site settings that Microsoft provides, but sometimes we don't know the significance of the site settings, and we often troubleshoot. We actually enable a particular feature and we are not able to see on the portals, and we spend a lot of time on the internet that why this feature is not being available on the portal. I have configured everything related to that. So same goes with this particular setting. So there is an option on the portal that on the individual record level you can perform an action. For example, you are exposing the case view or the case list on the portal, and on the individual case record you want to provide an option to the manager on the portal that they can directly resolve the case. They can change the status of the case to resolved, cancelled, or they can simply change it to deactivate as well, right? So if they want to do that, we need to enable this site settings in order to provide that feature on the portal so that the individual record label you can perform an action in the entity list. So this is the site setting for that. Write only JavaScript related to the entity list must be written on the entity list custom JavaScript. So I'll come to that part later because there are a lot of options in the portal to write the script, to write your HTML code or the client side script, right? So for example, if I'm using the entity list, I have a lot of options to write my script or the HTML code or the CSS, right? So I can write the code on the entity form. Sorry, I can write the code on the web page. I can write the code on the web templates. I can write the code on the entity list. But you need to you need to figure it out that on which component you have to use to write the code, right? So for example, if you want to run the code specifically for the entity list, for example, you want to perform any action when entity list finish loading. So always make sure that you are writing a script on the on the entity list. But sometimes what happen is the logic that you are writing is that might be useful in some other entity list or in some other components. Then it's a good practice that you are writing your code in your web template, because the code that you're writing in the web template can be reusable in other components as well, right? In other web templates as well. But the code which is being written in the entity list will be stick to that particular entity list. So always make sure that which component you are using for writing the codes. And the last one is the entity list page view, because when you create an entity list, you have the option that how many records you want to show in a particular page, right? So if you have selected the more than 10 records, for example 50, 60, or the 100 records, then obviously it will take time to reflect back on the portal. So always try to limit the size, limit the number of record that you are exposing on the portal on a particular page, because it will create a search issue. It will create the performance issues to load a particular list on the portal. So these are all the best practices related to the entity list. Now let's discuss about the content snippet. Content snippet is also a very useful component, especially when you want to play with the content, play with the text messages on the portal. There are a lot of requirements on the portal where we need to use some kind of text, some kinds of content on the portal. So content snippet, while creating a content snippet, the best practices are to write reusable code in the web template, because sometimes we have to create reusable code that might be used in the multiple components, right? So the web template and the content snippet are the two are the components where you can write the reusable code. Okay, to display the dynamics information on the content or the content on the portal. So sometimes what happens is you have to display the error message, you have to display the warning message or the success message. So what we do is what we usually do is we just simply hard code the message in our JavaScript code on the HTML language, right? So the problem is that when you enable the multilingual portal or enable the multiple language in the portal, right? So you need to write the code to change that particular text message for the Chinese user, for the Japanese user, and for the English user. So make sure whenever you are exposing any sort of content or the text message on the portal, just use the content snippet, because content snippet supports the multilingual, and you can create the multiple content snippet based on the multiple languages you have created, right? So this is one of the best practice you need to keep in mind while using the content snippet. So that I already discussed, like display text message on the portal to support multilingual. And the last one is that in order to edit content snippet, if you want that user can directly change the message or the content that is being provided on the portal, you should always use the website access permission and enable the manage content snippet permission on that website level. So you just need to make sure that you are not enabling that particular security option to all the users. You only should you should only expose that particular permission to those who you want to give them to change the content on the portal. Web template, that is one of the most used component that I like most on the portal is the web template. So there are a lot of interesting best practices that you have to follow, like do not change the out of box web template. There might be the possibility that few of the best practices that I'm mentioning in this session, you don't like it or you don't use it on your actual implementation. But this is I'm just sharing based on my experience. Do not change the out-of-box web template. So there are a list of web templates gets installed in your Dynamics 365 installed once you install the portal, right? So you get the home web template, you get the footer, you get the header web template. So sometimes what happen is, as per the client requirement, we want to change the home page UI or the header or the footer UI. So we straight away go to that particular template and start doing changes, right? So as per my recommendation, we can do that, but just make sure that you are taking the backup of the existing portal template or the web template code and doing start doing making changes in that, right? So and if it is possible, for example, we have the header and the footer web template out of box available. So there are two things. If you want to change the header and the footer code as per your client need, then the first option, you can directly make the changes in the header and footer web template code, and the second option is that you can just keep your header and web template intact. You can create your own header and web template and associate with your website, right? So there are two options are there. So if anything goes wrong, if you want to roll it back, you will have the original web template available with you. So it's up to you, but it is my recommendation that don't change the out of box web template. If you're making the changes, still if you're making the changes, then take the backup of it. Use web template to avoid writing same code multiple times on the different web pages. So that is one of the most important requirement that, sometimes we write the code that is being used on the multiple pages, multiple components. So if I talk about, for example, if I want to implement the loader functionality, so as soon as the page is getting opened, I just want to display, I just want to show the loader icon and the message like please wait, something this kind of requirement if I have, then so for example, if I have 30 to 40 web pages are there and all the 40 web pages I want to show that particular loader message and the icon. So the first option is that I have to write the same the 10 to 12 line of code on all the web pages, and the second option is that I can simply create a reusable component, or I can create I can keep my code in the web template and reuse that web template code in the multiple web pages. Okay, so this is the one requirement that you can simply imagine that how the web template can be used to create the to create as a reusable component. Apply proper entity permission. So if you are using any fetch XML, so the web template is the only component available in the portal where you can write the fetch XML as well. So just make sure that if you are using a fetch XML that you have enabled the proper entity permissions. Okay, and do not hardcode text message in your liquid code. So so liquid is basically the code that you write inside the web template, right? So if you have a need that if you are writing a liquid template code in your web template, then always use the content snippet for that. Okay, if you have any requirement to write or use any sort of URL, so for example, if you are redirecting user to one page to another page, then don't use the hard-coded the URLs. So for or any other examples, I would like to take uh, so for example, if you have a button on the page and you on click of that button, you want the user to redirect to another page. So you need to use the window.redirect or some other sort of functions, and you need to hard code the URL. So always use the site markers for that, and don't use any hard coded the URL. Always store configuration values in the site settings. There are n number of requirements we face on the portal where we need to store the key values pairs. For example, if I'm calling any external APIs that my client has provided, and I just wanted to consume that API in my portal. So there are a couple of configurations are there related to that API, right? So we have the URL, we have the client ID, secret key, or maybe the API's key. So there are list of configurations are there. So there are a lot of ways to do that, but the one of the best way that we can use is the site settings, because site setting is the key value pair, and you don't need to query to the site setting entities in order to get this value. You can simply use the syntax site settings and just pass the name of that site setting in order to get that value. So just make sure that if you have such kind of requirement where you need to store the configuration values, then you can simply use the web template. And according to me, if you can use this entity for the CRM configurations as well. And don't write your whole code in the one web template. So if you have a requirement where you have a very large amount of code you have to write, right? So you can split your web template into the multiple web templates and include in a single web template, right? So this actually makes your development process easy, because when you have to troubleshoot the particular code, or if you have to make any changes in the code, then it is very understandable if you are splitting your code into multiple web templates, right? So this is the one way. So for example, if you have a requirement that for example, you have a requirement that you have to call any external API, get the data and bind it to the HTML table, okay, and then you need to perform the CRUD operation in the Dynamic 365. So there are three features in that. So you can simply split your code in your multiple web templates. So for example, the retrieving the calling the external APIs and binding it to the HTML table, you can keep that code in the single web template. Then in the second web template, you can simply write the logic to perform the CRUD operation. So it's like that. So it's up to you what your requirement is, and based on that, you can simply split your code into multiple web templates. Only use the required attributes in the fetch XML. So if a particular attribute is not required, so don't keep it in the fetch XML to avoid any performance issues in the retrieval, and try to avoid inline CSS in the web template code. So there are multiple ways in the portals where you can simply reuse the CSS. So we have one option is a web file, where you can keep your CSS file and can refer it in your web template and your entity form, entity list, and the web pages, right? So try to avoid writing the inline CSS in your code. Site markers is basically used to to write the to simply use the redirection logic, or it is simply used if you have a requirement to redirect a particular user to a particular web page, then I think site marker is the best way to do that. So I've already covered that in site markers you can use if you have to redirect a user on a particular web page. So instead of hard coding the particular URL, you can simply create a site markers and associate the site markers with a particular web page. So you don't need to, so if any changes made in the web page, you don't need to change in the site markers. Not modify the out of box site markers is possible. Create your custom one. Okay. And the changing the name of the site marker is strictly prohibited, because I personally observed that if you make any changes in the existing site markers, you may face some of the issues in the deployment. All right. Site settings, it is also one of the important component of the portal. So there are a lot of interesting stuff related to the site setting, especially when you are creating a site setting. Do not change any out of box value of the site setting. So there are list of site setting you get once you install the portal. So always make sure that you are not changing any out of box value of that. Sometimes, when you make the changes in the site setting or create a new change, create a new site setting, it doesn't reflect on the portal immediately. So just make sure that you are refreshing the portal cache. But I personally observe that maybe in the latest version of the portal, it's not like that you have to restart the portal. But sometimes it happens in the trial portal, or maybe in your sandbox portal, that once you change any particular site setting values, it doesn't reflect on the portal. You may need to restart the portal as well. Okay, so I don't think like that. If you have made any changes in the site setting, it is not reflecting on the portal, and straight away you are going to the Microsoft and raising a ticket. So just simply first refresh the portal, wait for few moments. If it is not working, then you just need to restart the portal. Use site settings to store your CRM and portal configuration. So this is one of the this is one of the my understanding of using the site settings, because site setting is the key values pair. So for example, if I have a requirement where I need to call the web API, for example, any external customer API. So that API I needs to call it from the plugin, and that API I needs to call it from the CRM as from the portal entity form as well. All right. So the same API I have to call from the CRM and the portal both. So the configuration related to that particular API, like URL, the credentials, the API keys, will remain same. So for the portals, I can simply use the site setting where I can keep all the configuration related value in the site setting. But in the CRM side, I don't need to create any configuration entity. If I want to do that, I can simply use the site setting entities as well. So you can simply reuse the site setting entity for the CRM and portal if you want to keep any sort of configuration instead of creating a new custom entity. Make sure there is no white space in the site setting value, because the value should be proper. It should not contain any sort of special characters, especially in the case of out of box site settings, and there is no white spaces in that. Some site settings values are instance specific. So for example, if you are using any Azure AD B2C configuration, so the development site settings will always be differ from the UAT and the target or the production instance. So make sure that if you're doing any sort of deployment, don't include any Azure AD site setting. So first deployment, you can include that, but in the next time onwards deployment, you should not include the site setting. So this is the one example, but there are some other site setting you want to keep it differ from the from instance to instance basically. Web files, do not change the out-of-box portal bootstrap CSS file. So this is also the Microsoft recommends. So if you want to change if you want to change the bootstrap file that Microsoft has provided, just keep a copy of your out-of-box portal CSS file, then start making changes in the out-of-box one. Okay. So for example, if you made anything wrong in that bootstrap file, you have the backup of that existing CSS file. All right. Do not attach the very large file as a note attachment, because it will increase the performance issues, and it will create a performance issues and increase your database size as well. So try to use Azure Blob Storage if possible, and don't use home page as a parent page for all the web files, because if you use the home page as a parent web page, when you create a web file, automatically all the web files, all the images, the CSS, the JavaScript will be loaded on the home page. So the home page performance will get impacted. So for example, if I want to implement a CSS on the home page and a particular web page, all right. So just wanted to just you need to make sure that the CSS that you want to reflect on the web page, you are setting that web page as a parent page on the web file. Don't use the home page every time when you are creating a web file. Don't use any special characters, so that is applicable for the web page, entity form, and the entity list as well. And always use annotation entities in your portal deployment. So in the PowerApps CLI, you don't need to specify that, because the Microsoft has already done for you. But if you are still using a configuration migration tool, then you need to make sure that you are including the annotation entity in your portal deployment. And if you're trying to attach the JS type of extension file in your web file, it always creates the issues, because default that type of extension file is not supported in the Dynamics 365 setting. So you just need to go to the Dynamics 365 setting to enable that file option. Then only you will be able to upload that for extension file. All right, so if I talk about the portal security, ensure that your web role has been, so in the portal security is basically made up of two things: entity permission and the web roles. So ensure that your web role has the entity permission added. So what happens sometimes is we create the entity permission, but we forget to associate with the web role, and we often spend a lot of time in the troubleshooting that why the entity permission is not being reflected on the portal. So make sure that once you enable the entity permission, you are not done with that. You need to associate the web role as well. All right. And don't give your website access permission to all the users in order to, manage your content. So always make sure that, you are giving the website access permission to the admin users only, but to whom that only give to those users who want to change the portal directly from the portal UI. Okay. Make sure the authenticated user role checkbox is unchecked while creating a custom web role. So this is one of the most important thing, very minor thing, but you need to make sure and you need to keep in mind when you are creating a, the custom web role, this option is by default checked, the authenticated user role. So what happen is when you simply use this custom web role, the automatically all the roles, all the entity permission associated with this authenticated users will automatically apply to the custom web role as well. All right. So make sure that when you're creating a web role, just this authenticated user role checkbox must be unchecked. Portal user must have the unique email address. If two or more contact record, including the deactivated contact records, have the same email address, that contacts will not be able to authenticate on the portal. So there is a lot of issues in that. So just make sure that if you are, using the portals, your user must have the unique email address in the portal. And always use the web page access controls that I've already told you. So web page access control is basically used to control the access of the web pages. So if you are exposing the web pages on the portal, make sure you have enabled the proper entity permissions or proper web role associated with the web page so that your information is not being leaked to the unwanted users. Another thing with the portal cache, that make sure that change tracking features enable for that entity to avoid cache issue on the portal. So, there are a couple of options are there on the portal. So just need to make sure that change tracking feature should be enabled. Clearing the portal server cache or the configuration entity cache cause temporary performance degradation. So you just need to make sure that, you don't need to use the more often this clear server side cache, right? So we often hit the portal URL to clear the portal cache. So that is fine for the development and the testing instances, but that should not be done on the production instances. It is not recommended to use the plugins or the workflows to update data in the another entities and need that data changes to reflect immediately on the portal. So if you are creating if you are performing any operation on the direct entity, for example, I'm creating the record in the CRM. If I'm creating a case or contact or the account, it will immediately reflect on the portal. But if you are making the changes in some related entities, for example, if I'm creating a case, there should be some changes in the related record. So that related changes will take time to reflect on the portal, but the direct changes will be immediately reflect on the portal. The SLA for cache refresh is basically the 15 minutes time. So usually the out of box the out of box time that is defined to reflect the changes on the portal is the 15 minutes. But if you want to immediately changes reflect on the portal, nowadays we have the portal studio available. So you can simply open the portal in the studio in the editor mode and simply sync the configuration. So you don't need to clear the cache in order to improve in order to clear the server side cache. You can simply use the sync configurations. All right, so that I've already discussed, the portal editor doesn't require cache refresh. You can simply use the sync configuration option. The last one is the performance best practices. The performance best practices is basically you need to disable the web page tracking, web file tracking, login tracking. So these all the options you have on the web page label. So these options the Microsoft has already deprecated. So if you mistakenly enable these features, you need to make sure that these features are disabled because it increases the portal performance issues. There are few site settings like header output cache. So you need to make sure that these site settings are enabled. So the header and footer. So header and footer always available on all the pages that you are exposing on the portal. So you don't want that every time the header and the footer will be loaded on the portal because it will create a performance issues, right? So you can simply enable it for the output cache. So every time when you load the page, the header and footer will not be loaded. It will automatically reflect it from the portal cache. So you just need to make sure that you enable this site setting. Avoid creating large number of web file records. So if you are creating multiple web file records, then obviously it will create the performance issues. Entity form lookup configuration. Just make sure that if the number of records are very large in a particular record, you don't need to convert the lookup into drop down because it will create the form issues. The number of web rows should be less, so that is also impact the portal performance. Okay. Now I have covered all the best practices related to the development. Now there are few best practices that you need to follow based on the portal deployment, right? So there are multiple ways to do the deployment. In the earlier version, we used to use, the website copy tool. Sometimes we do it manually as well. And in the earlier version of the portal, and we are still using the configuration migration tool. And the latest Microsoft has introduced the PowerApps CLI that is currently in preview, but that is one of the best feature till now to deploy the portal. So there are a lot of ways that we have been using to deploy the portal, but there are few best practices we have to follow as well. All right. So from my experience, there are few best practices that you need to follow related to the portal deployment is the portal availability in your target Dynamics 365 instance. So if you are planning to deploy your portal, just make sure the same portal is basically available on your target instance as well. Okay. So for example, if you have installed the customer portal in your development instance, so before you are moving the changes or deploying the changes to the the UAT instance, the UAT instance should also have the same portal available. Planning for the multilingual portal, there might be the possibility that you are deploying the multilingual portal, right? So configure the languages in your target instance before planning for deployment. So if you are using a multilingual portal, first you need to enable that language at the Dynamics 365 instance. So if you are enable the Japanese or the Chinese language in your development instance, and in the target instance, if that language pack is not installed in the Dynamics 365, then you will not be able to deploy that. You will end up, getting a lot of issues. Some if you have enabled any third-party integrations, or sorry, or any out-of-box SharePoint integrations or any ISB integrations, if you have already done in your development instance on which your portal components is dependent, then you need to make sure in the target instance that all the solutions are deployed. So for example, SharePoint integration. So for example, if you're using the document management features in the source instance and in the target instance, if the the SharePoint integration is not there, so you just need to make sure that the SharePoint integration is enabled in the target instance as well. CRM solution strategy, always use different solution to hold all the portal related solution components. So that is a good approach, that you are keeping all your portal related solution components different from the Dynamics 365 components. Don't include site settings that I've already covered in each portal deployment. Deployment order should be like, always deploy the CRM solution first and then deploy the portal solution to avoid mapping issues. So this is basically applicable on the first time deployment, and the next time in deployment, if you haven't created any new component in the CRM solution, then you can change this order as well. Include views to avoid the OData queries issues. So this is one of the most important thing that you need to keep in mind. If you have enabled any OData query, if you have used any OData query, you know well that in the OData query you need to include the CRM views. So what happens sometime is, if you are deploying your portal changes, you are deploying your entity list, which in which you have enabled the OData query, but that views is not available in your target instance. So in that case, all the OData queries will get, will not work in the target instance. So make sure all the views which is associated with the entity list that you have created for the OData query is available in the target instance. And the last one is very basic, like there must be a proper collaboration, the communication between all your team members before planning your portal development to avoid any discrepancies. All right, so these are the some points related to the portal deployment. Keep your portal CI/CD pipeline separate from the Dynamics 365 pipeline. Avoid deploying or publishing changes without the knowledge of other developers. So just make sure, if you are doing any sort of deployment, just or your team members are aware about that particular thing. It's not like that. You need to inform each and everyone, communicate with your product owner, product manager, IT manager to find out who will be involved in the deployment process. And always take the backup just before starting the deployment. Just and you should have a proper plan to roll back the process in case of any unforeseen issues. And you should pause your development activities during the deployment. So that is a very basic thing. And during the deployment, send an email to everyone actively involved in the particular process. And the last one, if you're using a CI/CD Azure DevOps, then use the service connections pipeline variables to store your connection strings. All right. All right, so these are all the development and the deployment best practices related to the portals. At last, I just wanted to demonstrate that how you can simplify your portal deployment process using PowerApps Portal Build Tools. All right, so in my last session, I've already covered that part, but I have given a very basic understanding of this tool. So in this session, I am quickly going to demonstrate in 10-15 minutes that how you can install this PowerApps Portal Build Tools in order to automate your deployment. So this tool actually I have built on top of the PowerApps CLI. So this is the Azure DevOps extension I have created using the PowerApps CLI. Since PowerApps CLI is still in the preview phase and there are a lot of things that I'm expecting that Microsoft is involved including in that. But meanwhile, this Azure DevOps extension you can use to automate your PowerApps Portal deployment. Okay, so in the first release of this PowerApps Portal Build Tools, I have actually provided the feature that you can export the whole portal configuration and imported it to the target instance. But in my second release, based on a lot of folks request that they want to deploy only few entities, they want to have the features so that they can simply avoid deploying the same entities again and again, for example site settings or the web templates. So that, like I have told in my best practices, that you don't want that site settings to be deployed every time in your deployment, right? So in the second release of this PowerApps Portal Build tool, I have provided or enable a feature where you can simply exclude the entities or the tables that you don't want to include in a portal deployment. All right, so let's quickly have a look that how you can install this particular this PowerApps Portal Build Tools in your Azure DevOps instance. All right, so let me quickly open a browser. So here's the tool, the PowerApps Portal Build Tools. So if you want to install this tool in your Azure DevOps instance, so if you can see here, here's my Azure DevOps instance. All right. So if I want to use this particular tool, I can straight away go to this particular URL. I can share this with you in a while, or you can simply go to Azure DevOps instance. Here's my Azure DevOps instance. Go to this shopping cart. OK, browse marketplace. As soon as you will browse marketplace, you will be redirected to the Azure DevOps extension. And here you can simply find PowerApps Portals Build Tools. OK. So once you find that, you will get my tools on the first place, the PowerApps Portal Build Tools. Just click on that and click on Get It Free. So I have provided all the instructions over here that how you want to use, how you can enable this particular tool in your Azure DevOps instance, and how the all the steps will look like with all the explanation. So you can simply read this article in order to use this particular extension. So once you click on Get It Free, you will be redirected to your Azure DevOps instance. And if you have the proper permission enabled in your in your Azure DevOps instance, you just need to select the user type and you can simply install it. All right, so once you click on install, it get installed in your Azure DevOps instance. You need to go to the your Azure DevOps instance, and if you want to check whether it's installed successfully and what other extension you have already installed in your Azure DevOps instance, you just need to go to the organization settings, extensions. And if you can see here, I've already installed the PowerApps Portal Build Tools. I've already installed the Microsoft provided Power Platform Build Tools as well. So this you can simply use to automate your Dynamic 365 deployment, your Power Apps, your Power App flows, and all the stuff, all the components related to the Dynamic 365. but this is specifically for the portals if you want to automate that. All right, so this is currently installed, and you can, if you want to uninstall that, you can simply uninstall it from here, and you can see the version and all the information related to that. So if I made any changes in this tool, you can simply get the the updated changes as well. All right, so so this is installed, so I can start using this tool in my pipeline. So I go to my Azure DevOps. Okay, I'm just opening my project Power Guide. So if you can see here in my repository, I have two folders, Dynamic 365 solution and the Portal solution. So I'm not going to use this Dynamic 365 solution. You can check my last recording where I have demonstrated how you can use the Power Platform build tools provided by the Microsoft in order to export and import or automate your, your Dynamic 365 deployment. This is the folder I'm going to use. In this folder, I've actually created two folders, portal deployment and portal source. OK, in the portal source folder, I'm going to use the complete configuration that I'm exporting from my development instance. And in the portal deployment folder, I'm going to store only those configuration that I want to deploy to the target instance. All right, so that's why I've created the two folders. All right, so let's go back to the pipelines. So I've already created two pipelines, but just for the demonstration, I'm going to create a new pipeline. OK, so I'm just going to use the classic editor, and my code is there in the Azure repos Git repository. So I'm going to continue, and I don't want to, you don't want to write the YAML for that because I've already created everything available for you. So you just need to click on the empty job. Let me open this it again. OK. All right. So this is the pipeline that I'm actually creating for portal deployment. So let me change the name of this pipeline first. So I'm just call it portal 020. OK. And hyphen. So CI stand for the continuous integration. All right. So this is the name of my pipeline. Now, so since my extension is already installed, so you just need to go to the plus icon and need to find the portals, PowerApps portals, or maybe just portals. So once you search the portal, you will find my instance. Sorry, you find my extension. So there are three tasks are there: portal tool installer, export portal configuration, and import portal configuration. So this portal tool configuration is basically used to install all the prerequisites services or the tools on the Azure on your DevOps virtual machines. And export portal configuration is used to export your portal configuration from your source instance. And import portal configuration is basically used to import the configuration into the target instance. All right. So these three are the task is basically needs to use. So portal tool installer, you need to add this first. All right, you don't need to provide any details over here. Then next you need to again find it, and you need to export the portal configuration. So once you install the export, add the export portal configuration, it asks a couple of things. So so in order to export the portal configuration, you need to make the connection from your development instance, right? Then only you will get the portal configuration. So you need to first provide the Dynamic 365 URL. All right. So let me quickly go to my Dynamic 365 instance. So let's say here's my Dynamic 365 instance. I'm just opening the management app. Let me copy. OK, so this is my source instance. I'm just copying this the Dynamic 365 URL. All right. How I can get the website ID? So this is my development instance portal. I need to open this starter portal, and on the URL, you can simply find the website ID over here. This is the configuration related to the Dynamic 365 in the portal. Now, in order to connect with my source instance, I need to provide some, some Azure AD related configurations. So since I just want to, I don't want to use the user ID password straight away to log in into the Dynamic 365 instance because it will not support the multi-factor authentication. So I have registered an app. So I'm going to use the OAuth authentication, obviously. So for that, I'm going to, so I've already registered a particular app. So if you can see here, I've already registered an app. So there is an app, and I have provided few permissions over here. So if I go to, just go to the, okay, overview. Just give me a moment. Application registration. Okay, so this is the application registration. If I open this app, so there are a couple of permission I have given to this app. So if I go to the API permission, you can see there is a list of permission I have provided this to a particular app. But I just want to make the connection with the Dynamics 365. So that's why I've just went to this add a permission, and I've just included this dynamic CRM user impersonation, so that I can be able to connect with my Dynamics 365 through this particular app. All right. So I'm not going to use that because it's already been added. What I'm going to use it, I'm just going to use the application ID of this app. So let me copy this. Right. I'm going to delete this application ID straight away after this session, so that we cannot use that after this. So if I need to use the client secret, I need to go to the Azure DevOps, Azure session. I need to go to the certification and secrets, and I can simply create a new secret for that. Okay. And okay, just I'm taking for 3 months, add it. So once I create the secret key, I will copy it from here. Will provide over here. Now the next thing I need is the tenant ID. So in order to get the tenant ID, I will simply go to my home, view my Active Directory. All right, so here's my tenant ID. I will copy it, tenant ID. All right, so this is the Azure configuration I have done. And I've already created an application user in my Dynamics 365 instance. All right, based on these configurations, so that I can be able to, connect with my Dynamics 365 instance, and make sure that you have enabled a proper security to that particular user as well. Now there are two things here: the save export data all and save export data selected. All right. So if I give the information part, choose folder path where you want to save the whole portal data export. So I want to export my whole portal data under the source. So I'm just selecting this source. So I just want to store my whole portal configuration here. So this you can use as a backup as well. So you can schedule this particular pipeline on the nightly basis, so that your whole portal data configuration will get stored in that particular location. And the selected part is basically used for the deployment purpose. So the folder where you want to store only selected tables portal data export. OK, so just go there, and I'm choosing the portal deployment part. All right, now exclude data. So this is the new feature that I've just added, that what tables or the data you want to exclude it from the deployment. So the mentioned table or file name in a comma separated format that you don't want to include in your portal deployment. So the syntax is like the web pages, web template, the site setting YAML. So just copy this, and you just need to paste it between the double quotes. All right, so this is a comma separated way. Now if I go to the output variable, there is an reference name I need to provide. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to send these configuration values to my next step of the pipeline. Okay, so let me open my existing pipeline so that I don't need to waste the time. So portal CI pipeline, I've already created that in my last session. So if you can see here, I've used the the PowerShell script, the commit code. So whatever I'm doing here, so for example, I'm exporting the configuration and storing it the particular location. So this actually storing the a particular data on my on the local repository, right? So in order to push that particular changes from local to the remote repository, I need to use the commit command. So I need to go to the build part and need to add the PowerShell script. All right, so I'm just using this script, just renaming it to commit. and just taking the whole script from here. Okay, so this script is doing nothing. This script is basically I'm actually providing okay, just give me a moment. All right, this, select the inline. So what this is this particular PowerShell script is doing is it actually taking the email ID that I'm using currently. Okay, so you need to provide the email ID from which you are logged in, and you can simply provide the folder name, the deployment, the source where I'm actually pushing my code, and just commit the changes. So this is the one PowerShell script that I'm using to push my changes to the remote repository, and one PowerShell script I'm using just to exclude the data that I don't want to include in my deployment. So this is the PowerShell script to exclude the data. Okay, so I'm just copying it again and paste it over here. So this is all the information you can get it from my extension. So I've already mentioned all the scripts and everything in my extension as well. So what this particular script is doing, this particular script is basically whatever the table name I have provided under the exclude data part, it actually deleting the folder of this particular the tables, so that only the specific tables or the folder will get deployed there. Perfect. Okay, so let me quickly check whether I have written. All right, perfect. So, all right, so the last step I'm going to do is I'm just using the publish artifacts so that running out of time. So let me quickly publish artifacts, publish build artifacts. And in this publish build artifact, I need to provide the path where I want to, so once I export the portal configuration, I need to push it to the artifact so that in my release pipeline, I can take it from the artifacts and deploy it to the target instance. Okay, so here I'm using portal artifacts and path to publish where I just want to publish my, the portal data. So I can simply go here and my portal deployment I'm going to take, because here I'm going to store, the export of the data. So I'm actually using this path. And here is the artifact name. I can simply replace it with some other name as well, maybe the portal data. Okay. All right. So this is the build pipeline. My pipeline is done. Now, the one interesting fact is that if you don't want to directly use these values here, so for example, if you don't want to expose the URL, website ID and application ID, anytime you can go to create a variables. OK, so if you can simply create a variable like client ID. OK, and you can store the values over here. OK. And you can mask it as well so that no one can read this particular value, and you can simply use this and client ID over here like this. You can simply instead of providing the hard coded values, you can simply replace it with the variables as well. So as of now, I'm just providing the hard coded values. I'm just running it. Let me check whether it runs. Go to the agent job. All right, so meanwhile it's running. Is there any questions you can ask me if anyone has joined the call? All right, so if you have any questions, meanwhile you can ask me till the time this pipeline is being run.
I don't see any question in the chat, Arpit. I think this is really good because we kind of cruised through this last time. So the fact that you're going step by step is great.
Yeah. If you still find it confusing and if you're still missing any information, I've tried to include all the steps with the screenshots and try to include all the PowerShell scripts as well. And if you want to know that how you can register a particular app, you will get a lot of articles on the internet that how you can simply register the Azure AD app and how you can use the OAuth authentication in that. Yep. So okay. So now you can see here, it's actually downloading all the portal data. One more interesting thing that I just wanted to include here is in the portal, the PowerApps CLI that Microsoft has recently provided. They have actually provided manifest file as well along with the portal export. So I'm going to show you that straight after this, export. That so I was actually wondering that I can exclude the particular portal data from being deployed to the target instance using that manifest file, but somehow Microsoft doesn't allow to do that. Okay, so it's getting failed. Let me check it how it's getting failed. Check trivially has been disabled. Power guide and this prompt disabled. All right. Okay. So there are a couple of things that I need to make sure. For example, my commit is failed and the error is showing like this power guide report terminal prompts disabled, right? So you get this error usually. Why I'm getting this error? Because the user that I have provided in my pipeline is not allowed to actually commit the code in my repository. All right. So to do that, you go to the project settings and just let me check the permissions. If you go to the permissions, go to the users. If you go to the permission, so there are a couple of permission you need to enable that. Okay. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can ask me. Let me quickly check the permission because it's the permission related issues. Okay, go to the repository, security, power guide repo, security. All right, so if I go to the users. Okay, so if you can see here, in order to, if I want to, use this particular command, the commit, you need to have the allow permission on the contribute. So currently it's set to not set. If you change it to allow, okay, and you need to make sure that all this create branch, contribute to pull request, contribute. So these all the permissions should be allowed in order to commit the code in your repository. So this is for this one. And if you go to the collection service again, yeah, so it's already set to allow. Perfect. Okay. And yep, so it's already saved. Okay, so this also. So just make sure that you have the proper permission enabled in order to commit the code. So when I will run this pipeline again, it will run perfectly. And it will commit the code in the portal solution. So how does it work? So in this session, I have just demonstrated, how you can simply create all the, you can configure this extension step by step in order to see that how it works end to end. You can see the recording of my last session. So where you can see that how it actually works, how you can commit the code and how the portal configuration will start appearing in the repository. So that's it for today. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. Thanks a lot.
All right, we got comments mostly on the chat window from me. I think Sharon is just saying this is great, um, but I don't see any hands up. I personally like. I mean, I seen this presentation before on the pipeline, so I really like that you did it detailed. But if folks join us late today, we started 1 hour earlier, as we mentioned last week. the recording will be available, but you want to look at the first part as well. The first part is chips and traits from Arpit on each major part of portals, what to do to avoid trouble. So if you don't want to lose hair like me in your implementations, you really want to go through those chips because they are really good. Arpit, I
Yep.
really like it. You know where to create, where to place your code, playing with portal cache, all that stuff. It's good content that I think whomever joined us late today will need to go back to the recording and watch it there. But again, Arpit, thank you so much for your time today. Really
Thanks.
appreciate you putting this content together for us. Very good content. Again, it's going to be available on the YouTube channel. You can review it later if you haven't seen it. Yeah, thank you so much. We are pretty much one session down from the end of this particular term two for Zero to Hero. We'll be talking about PCF controls in portals next week. Either myself will present or someone from the product team at Microsoft will join us and do a presentation. I'm still rooting for the Microsoft resource to be able to join us as they can talk about things that I may not be allowed to talk yet because of NDA concerns. So hopefully they will join and do the session on PCF. If not, I'll take that on and we'll be talking about it next week. For next week, folks, we are meeting again at 11 a.m. Mountain. So if you don't want to miss the presentation, I'd say join early. Uh, Put it on your calendars. If you haven't, I'm gonna change the invite here as well for 11 a.m. and we'll see you then. All right. Thank you so much, Arpit. Again, we'll be talking more as we end the this particular Zero to Hero session in portals. We are looking to what to do next, what type of program or product, if you will, we talk about next. I have it. I see a need in the market to talk about Dataverse, just the application design, creating entities, but not only how to create entities, but going back to database design and talk about fundamentals and then grow from there, creating the tables. Sorry, I keep referring to that as entities in the new naming convention tables, creating columns, creating forms and views, all that, but going to the very foundational part of database design and then growing. Based on the polls that I did lately, the community has talked about doing Power Automate. I think the community prefers to do like a 101 session on Power Automate. So we'll discuss and see how we get it done. I think there is a need in the market to go back to the very beginning on Dataverse, and then maybe we do a 101 on Dataverse, then we do a 101 on Automate, and then we go back to Dataverse PCF, and we mix and match. But I feel that there is a need for that particular skill set to be explored a little more. All right. Folks, that's all we got for today. I know some folks just joined us for the last 20 minutes. We started 1 hour earlier today, so you're gonna have to catch up on the recording. Next week we're gonna be early again, so I'm gonna send more reminders as we approach it. But it's gonna be the last lesson of this session too. All right. So thank you so much. We'll be see you soon. Talk to you
Thank
next week.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
Arpit. Thank you,
Bye.
Victor. Happy birthday also to Lily Rose.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.